All right, welcome. Michael, thanks for taking the time for speaking with us because
Thanks for
I
having
think
me.
I think you've got some good stuff there. So for those who may not know you, introduce yourself so it's quite clear on where you're from, what you've done, and what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Michael. I'm from a small medium-sized suburb north of Toronto called Vaughan. Kind of been living the last 15 years or so in the city, and I guess I've spent about 10 years working in the operations field, mostly within the tech space, but also sort of investing a significant amount of time investing in multifamily residential properties, mostly around the southwestern Ontario region.
That's awesome. So I know you've done fairly well with real estate, but let me talk about your background because you're telling me that a lot of your operations in IT has helped with the real estate side of things.
Yeah. So I have a
In
sort
what
of more
way? In what way? Like when you say operational IT, it's a
yeah,
wide group. That's a wide. What does
totally.
that really mean?
Yeah, so not specifically IT. I think when I think about operations, I think about how does a business sort of, I don't know, move and shake and operate, so to speak, but
Okay.
do so in a way where you can scale sustainably. So how do I grow the amount of business that we're doing, but keep in line and or reduce the variable cost of doing one more piece of business, one more widget, one more whatever it is that we're measuring in this case.
So
And
efficiency,
efficiency, but also sort of
which
holding
increases
on the balance.
profitability.
Correct. But also holding on the other side of the balancing equation, keeping quality in check.
Mm,
Because I can crank the efficiency all I want, but if customers leave because the product or service that we're giving them is poor, it
yeah.
doesn't really help. So keeping both of those in check and in line as we quote unquote scale.
So how did you get
Um,
into this?
Good
What's your
question.
background? Like
Yeah,
you told me you went to Queen's University. That's awesome.
sure.
What did you study?
Yeah, I did commerce, so I did business at Queens.
Yeah.
Kind of stumbled into a rotational leadership management program at Bell, of all places. They
Cool.
did an excellent job, among others, recruiting on campus, and so yeah, quite honestly, like I didn't really know where I was going coming out of undergrad.
Well, what
Um,
did you graduate, what, 21, 22? Like obviously you got your whole life in front of you. Or younger than
yeah,
that?
totally. Yeah, I was probably 21, 22, something along those lines. Didn't really have any idea what industry I specifically wanted to be in. Quite frankly, looking back, I'm not really sure it mattered. What mattered was that I landed in a place where I could be learning very fast, and I was
Hmm.
fortunate enough to do that. And I ended up switching industries altogether, spent a little bit of time in sort of the fintech space, finance, a little bit more time in tech, worked in grocery delivery of all things for a long time. Um, and and as I moved, I realized, the fundamental skill here was operations and trying to kind of, as I was saying before, um, push on what levers were available in that particular business to drive down variable costs, but also keep quality in check. And I realized as that was all happening, okay, I can change content here going into a brand new industry and learning the content of the business. What's to make real estate so special and so unique that I can't do the same thing there?
So
Um,
what point did you say real estate's for me? Because there's a lot out there. There's a lot of
yeah,
shenanigans. There's everyone promising anything, everything. So
totally.
what did you see, read, or follow, or did you speak to somebody, a friend, family, that you said, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna spend some time and effort investing in this.
Yeah, well, when I first got into real estate, it was by no means strategic in that, oh, I want to build a portfolio and I want to make this, how can I make this repeatable?
You
That
want to
wasn't
quit
even a
your job
question
in
in my
six
mind.
months.
Yeah,
It
no,
was,
no,
it was
that wasn't even a question in my mind. It wasn't even about building assets, to be honest with you. When I first kind of stumbled into it, I like to say, was, I don't know, maybe 4 years out of undergrad. And I was looking for a place on my own. Wanted to live that downtown Toronto life, was originally looking for a condo. Kind of like many of my peers, I moved home, so I saved a lot really quickly. And my parents were very, very supportive of just my endeavor to kind of move downtown on my own as well. And I guess while I was hunting, um, I kind of switched gears in terms of what I was looking for. This was 2016 in Toronto, and I know it was harkening to a long time back, but the real estate market was incredibly hot, and I kept getting outbid. And I would go into it with one expectation and come out of it being kind of dejected. And one of the things I realized after being outbid so many times was if I actually went up a small tier of property from condo into a smaller house that was potentially cut up into a couple units, not only were there less people competing at that level, but it would also be more affordable for me. It was more expensive to get in, but over the course of ownership, it was actually more affordable because I could subsidize some of that mortgage payment with rental income. And so, lo and behold, years later, I would find out that this is a strategy called house hacking. But by no
But I
by
mean,
no means was it this.
did you come up with the idea yourself, or did you read about it? Did you just say, how did it come
Yeah,
about?
yeah. I don't quite know what the original impetus was. I had a coworker, and now I consider him a very close friend of mine, who was trying to do the same in a different market. He was kind of from the Hamilton area, and things were generally more affordable there. And so I think maybe he put the idea in my mind, but the idea would not have come to reality if not for the fact that my mom was actually a career property manager,
Oh,
in
really?
in a bit of a different space, but
Okay.
residential real estate either way. And for that reason was very supportive of my biggest hesitation on doing something like this, which would be I don't know what the first thing is about
Hmm.
having a tenant and what happens when this breaks and what if I get a bad tenant? Like how does that all work? And I'd kind of, living at home growing up, heard her having a lot of those conversations with potential new tenants, and I heard all the horror stories and I heard all the good stories as well. So there was some level of comfortability taking it on, plus the sort of live at the time encouragement that, we can help you if you don't know how to get a tenant or know what questions to ask or know what to
Because at
do
this
if you
age,
get
at this time,
one.
you're what? You're 26 or so.
I think I was 25 when I started putting in offers, and then
Okay.
when I moved in, yeah, right around there. Um, so yeah, I still it took 9 months to get that first place, and that was I'm sure my the agent that was working with me at the time was
How
getting
many
a little bit tired, but I
how
think we
many
put in
offers? How
probably
many offers did you send out?
I don't know 12, 14, something like that,
Okay. All right.
and a couple of them fell through in the inspection phase. Like we had them accepted, and then we found something in the inspection that we didn't love and
Hmm.
kind of pulled. Um, But I will
And
say this, the market was so hot that a lot of times you needed to put in sort of a clean, unconditional offer.
yeah.
I would go and do the inspection before we actually submitted the offer for that reason. Like just sign of the
And how
market,
did you
right?
choose the realtor? Because a lot of people, it's important. Having a really good realtor makes a huge difference, especially if you're just starting off, because
Mhm.
you're gonna make a lot of bids. You're gonna be hesitant. How did you
Yep.
choose this realtor?
Yeah, I can't say it was incredibly strategic that time around
Hmm.
since it has changed a lot, but it was a referral from a friend of mine who had recently bought a condo. And to be honest, this realtor's specialty was condo. But I mean, she was also in the city, sort of young and hungry and
Yes,
wanting
yes,
to do
yes,
as many as she
yes.
could. And I'll give her all the credit in the world. Never ever said that she was unavailable or couldn't come to a showing with me. So yeah, I mean, helped for sure. Wasn't the realtor that would be right for me to scale a portfolio if we're talking about that. But at
Mhm.
the time, yeah, that's kind of how it came to be.
So let's go back to that same question. It seems like the way you think is in procedures and systems to scale efficiency and profitability. How did you do this in the real estate world?
Yeah, so I think it became more relevant after property number two. Honestly, property number two is when I started to think a bit more of a business and less of what I can do. And property number three is where it really began to take off.
Mhm.
And when I purchased number two, it was honestly the result of the market doing really, really well after number one, and me gaining a whole bunch of equity kind of out of nowhere and realizing, okay, borrowing costs are still pretty low. I can probably leverage this property to purchase another one. It just can't be a big one in Toronto. I got to leave the city. And the math and the scalability, so to speak, worked as follows. A property in, I call it like a B tier city. For me, it was Brantford. And basically the math worked such that the cost of these properties was about a quarter of the cost of what I was looking at in Toronto for a similar
Okay.
style property. However, the rental income you could make from one of those was about half.
Hmm.
So it wasn't proportional, which the way that shook out, month over month is there could be some cash flow coming from these properties and I don't have to worry about my own income supporting them. Now this is with cost of borrowing what it was at the time, which was pretty much all-time lows. Um, and I was still a good saver. Like that part didn't go away. I was still gainfully employed. I
And
didn't,
the saving part of it, I think it's so important. Few people
yeah.
talk about this. It's not a sexy topic. No one's going to have a weekend webinar about saving because it's pretty straightforward. Where did you pick up that habit of saving? Is it from your parents or just innately? I mean, it's very important, especially during a recession as well.
Yeah, good question. I think like for me, there was never my target is to save this month, this much every month. It was my paycheck goes directly into a savings account, and I
Hmm.
need to figure out what feasibly I can spend this month. Like it was almost the reverse, right? How do I minimize the spending rather than how do I maximize the saving?
Okay.
Um, and I don't know where exactly that came from. Like I don't think my parents are like particularly frugal or particularly the opposite end of the spectrum. I think they're probably somewhere in the middle. But I mean, I can give them a lot of credit for like always being intentional about what you spend your money on. I think
Hmm.
maybe that's always a characteristic that I've had as a result of them. But in any case, I went through that process of like, what am I making and what should be left at the end of the month pretty early.
And
The
what
question,
I'm curious to know, um, what was your expenses for living compared to your income?
yeah, what like portion of that
What
probably went into
portion?
saving?
Just for accommodation. So because typically, it's about
Ah,
35%, 30%, or 42 is
yeah.
what, lenders like to see. What were you like? What was the calculation? Do you know the percentage?
Yeah, so I mean, pre-moving out of, like I said, I moved home after
Yeah.
undergrad, so I was
I
really
have
able to
complete
minimize them
respect for
there.
that. You're just
Yeah,
starting off. It's smart. It's a smart move.
totally. And actually, my biggest expense at the time was driving to work and gas because I didn't work nearby. I drove quite a bit for work, but anyways, gas is minimum compared to when I moved out and needed to start spending on rent slash mortgage.
Yeah.
Um, I want to say it was around like
Like those starting
six,
off.
16 to 1800 bucks. I think that was around what I was paying
Yeah.
to live. And that's not including like because I was immediately paying utilities and property taxes and insurance and everything else, right?
Okay.
That was really just like my portion of what I thought the opportunity cost of that unit would be if it were rented on the open market. So like that's like theoretically my rent, right? Um, Now I've tried to continue to think about things in those terms.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, it's also quite different because those ancillary costs that I just kind of brushed off, they add up quite a bit, especially if you buy an old property like I had at the time. So adding those into your equation, if you're not renting and you're owning, are important. Like you shouldn't
Yes.
overlook them. So I don't mean to brush them off quickly for other folks like thinking about doing something like this. You need to include them in the
You need a
math.
reserve.
Totally,
A total reserve
totally.
to fix things because unexpected are going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. And honestly, the hardest part about doing the math when you're buying a property is figuring out how big that reserve is going to be. Because
Hmm.
if you can lock in a number and be happy about it and consider yourself conservative with the approach, that will steer you clear. At least in my experience, it's helped steer me clear from overbuying, right? You get into this like exciting
Hmm.
bidding war and you're like, if I just put up another like 20 or $30,000,
Yeah.
which 80% of that can be buried into the mortgage. I'll get this place, right? But what you don't realize is, great, that'll secure you it, and then the moment that you know the roof needs to be changed or whatever the infrastructure cost is, now I've got that much less to deal with. So I'm going to try and push those things out into the future and potentially cause more hardship for myself.
I like that you're
Um,
strategic with your investing. Tell me more about the procedures and systems that you put into place in order to scale to buy more properties.
Yeah, for me, it's just like, well, not for me. I would say for everybody,
Hmm.
it's really about projecting the inflows and the outflows,
Okay.
right? Like what's going to be going out, what's going to be coming in, And if I'm buying something strictly as an investment property versus something I'm going to be living in, and there's some value in obviously enjoying that place. But if we just talk about this side for a moment, um, is that asset going to be able to carry itself? And what are the chances that it's not going to be able to? And not just what are the chances, if that thing happens, how bad could it get? So I'll be more specific.
Mm.
We know that we're going to be paying property taxes. Those are pretty easy to project because you can look at the history of the property, right? Utilities and insurance, pretty similar,
Yep.
right? Like the projections shouldn't be crazy. Um, Rents, the probability that I'll be able to rent it and the amount that it will rent for, things that you can do homework on, right? And guess within a few percentage points, right?
Hmm.
Um, Now you can go down the rabbit hole of like, oh well, it's a studio versus a 2 bedroom. Which one is like more attractive on the market? Which one has worse rates of being empty, and account for all those things. But generally speaking, these are all things that you can say, okay, here's how much is going to go out. Here's how much is going to come in. Here's the difference between those two, given current and potentially future rates. And then you have to account for all of your the question marks, right? Like
Mm.
the one that everyone's talking about right now and has for the last 18 months is interest rates.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, but it's not the only big one. Many of the other big ones are one-time costs, right? Like I mentioned the roof earlier.
Hmm.
One of the houses I bought once was like on its probably 40th year of having the same boiler in the house. Like it was clearly on its last legs. The question was, what day was it going to go down?
Yeah. I
Um,
like a house. The way I see it is sometimes a house has a lifespan. Like certain elements, a roof, a furnace, or
right,
a boiler, hot water tank,
right,
everything has a lifespan. And when
right.
lenders, appraisers take a look at it, they're also calculating lifespans, and which is once again very important. But when I feel few people talk about these things, lifespan
Yeah, and
of elements of a house.
completely true. And it's also important, I think, one of the things I've learned is to get someone, to help you come to some conclusions on these things and be able to project, which is what this is all about, right? Who kind of has your best interest at hand. So I'll be more specific. Like if you're trying to evaluate how long something is going to last, and then you need to buy that new roof or whatever the thing is.
Hmm.
Um, some folks are incentivized to like transact on the property. Some folks are incentivized because they're trying to come up with the mortgage value on the property because they represent the
Yes.
bank. Some folks represent the city because they're trying to figure out what the taxes should be next year on the property. They
Yes.
work for MPAC or something, right? And so you could ask the same question to 3 different groups and get 3 very different answers. And this is something that I didn't really understand early on. And now I'm, very intentional when I think about, okay, who am I asking? What's their angle? And, what's the real answer relative
I
to
like
what
I
they're
like
giving
that.
me?
The way I like to put it is uh the surgeon's solution is always surgery.
Right.
It's always that. So yeah, definitely who you
Right.
ask they'll have their own intentions, their own biases
Right.
on what to do with it. Of course. I like that
Yeah.
perspective.
So I think on the projection side, one of the things that I was actually very lucky, I would consider myself very lucky early on, was I had a really, really strong inspector who was actually referred to me by that original real estate agent, but I've stuck with this inspector ever since. And one of the things he's really good at is being able to balance the here's how much this thing would cost to replace it with
Hmm.
the here's how important I think it is to replace this early versus how long you can probably get away with that thing feasibly. Um,
Hello? Hello? Oh,
but for those,
oh, okay.
regardless of, oh, sorry, did you lose me
Yeah,
there?
we cut off a bit there.
Yeah, I apologize. But sorry, what I'm saying is you want to come away with of that experience with here's like the bill tomorrow if I bought this property.
Hmm.
Um, do I have that much as well in my hopper
Yep.
after I transact on the property, after I put the down payment and the property sorry, what do you call it, the land transfer taxes and the closing costs, like after all these things, do I have that much left over? And if not, I really can't afford this property. I should either change the price or go somewhere else, like new property.
Yeah.
Let's keep looking.
I love that
I
approach. I think
I
it's a
would say
that's a
I would say
very smart
I
approach.
change a lot easier than a lot of other folks. I think that's one of the big differences is
Yeah.
like I always tell my agent, like, if it's not for me, like, we're gonna keep going and I'm gonna operate in good faith and I'm gonna put in offers. Um, but I'm gonna be very firm on like the max that is available. And I take a lot longer to buy than a lot of other folks do for that reason.
I think
Um,
that's very, very
yeah,
smart. Very, very smart. I think you need to be meticulous in those investments. Sometimes what we've done in the past is we've changed like when we're doing duplexes, like it's a whole new basement. And then
right,
upstairs, whatever we don't touch eventually fails. We try to spruce up as much as possible, but it's true. It's a large cost in the renovations in the
totally.
beginning. And it's probably best to have a large cost in the renovations because that way it'll float. The way I look at it is a 5 years time span. If it's going to break down in less than 5 years, just replace it. More than
Right.
5 years, we're good. So different approaches, but I think it's
Yeah.
very important to be meticulous and strategic with it.
Yeah. Also
What
depends how
what?
long you want to hold it for. Like
Oh,
I don't,
good point.
yeah, I kind of, my investing thesis, generally speaking, is like I don't really want to buy anything that I don't think I can hold for an entire market cycle. And let's call that, I don't know, 7 to 10 years.
Hmm.
Um, I just and this is kind of my hesitation to flipping as well. I've never done a flip. I'm not sure I ever will. Maybe not. Never say never. But generally speaking, you can be the best executor in the world. You can do everything right. And if the market works against you, it eliminates everything that you've wanted to do. And so I think about that even in the, the Burr strategy or buying and holding as well. If you are willing to and able to both hold for 7 to 10 years, it kind of not eliminates, but significantly reduces the risk that market change is gonna, eliminate all of
Hmm.
your returns or really counteract the skill that you've put into it.
Well put. Very
Um,
well put.
yeah.
So what other procedures or systems that you've implemented in the real estate investment world that I think that's one of your fortes. What would you say that's your superpower? Like what's your superpower of real estate investing? Because I like the way you speak, Michael. It's thoughtful, systematic, and meticulous, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. I don't know. I generally like to think like my curiosity, but it also gets me in trouble at sometimes, like just asking like why we're doing that. And I try to do this from a first principles perspective. Like if we could build this from the very beginning without any assumptions today, like how would we do it? And I think if I'm to split that into two parts, one is the process of buying and figuring out if something is a good thing to buy at a certain price or not, and like predetermined questions to ask, which we've talked a little bit about. But
Mhm.
the other part of it is managing, and I don't just mean managing tenants, but managing the property itself. Both need to be
Mm.
meticulously managed. And so there was a time when I was managing the entire portfolio on my own. I'm getting help now managing the portfolio with an excellent property management company. I had to cycle through a few property management companies before
Of course.
I was happy with one. But I mean, to me, helping them and the balancing act of like making recommendations, but also like this is your business, you run it yourself. Um, the operations comes into that wholeheartedly, and that was probably the first place when I was managing myself. I was like, why do people collect applications this way? Why do people vet applications this way?
Mhm.
Can we like high level, just like low hanging fruit? Can we digitize things? B, can we optimize the types of questions that we're asking for? Because these ones are just questions that previous property managers have asked, not necessarily questions that get us the answers that we
Like
actually
what
want.
question would you add in there that just throws people off? Like
Um,
that provides a bit of more deep data.
well, honestly, not throws people off, but one of the things that I thought was missing early on is finding out what someone's credit score was.
Hmm.
I don't even necessarily talking about an entire extensive report, but like there were a lot of instances early on. I wasn't running the process, but again, this was one of the property managers that I was like working with, and it was like, how do we know that this person's going to pay rent?
Yeah.
Uh, they've had this job for a little bit, and then I was like, well, what's their credit score? Because like I've had a job for a while, and my credit score could be good, could be bad, right? Um, Oh, the applicant isn't willing to give it. They say that that's like a little bit
No.
personal. Yeah, and that's fine. Like you can decide whether something is too personal for you to give, but
Yeah.
we can also decide whether this is somewhere that it's going to be rented to or not. Like everyone gets to make their own decisions. I'm respectful of that. Um, but look, some things are easier, some things are more difficult. But
Mhm.
again, there's like quality of the applicant in getting them through the funnel, and then there's how efficient we are with the funnel itself. So like just simple things like standing up a Google form,
Now,
right?
have you automated certain things, certain elements that you've automated? I mean, the great thing now I feel is AI, and a lot have used it. Others are fearful of it. I think it's an
Yeah,
amazing tool, and it will touch upon so many industries, especially
yeah.
real estate investing.
There are 1,001 use cases in the real estate investing world. Like it's no exception to the it'll be disrupted by AI as far as I'm
Mhm.
concerned. I think one of the biggest ones, and this is from the purchaser buying perspective, this is from the renting perspective, is taking all of the instances, like real estate's a generally pretty low tech industry, all of the instances where someone is entering long form text. So think about, for example, you go to buy a property, there's like a long paragraph description at the bottom. It's called like seller's notes or something,
Yes.
or agent's notes. Creating data points with that, I think, is a really easy one. Because that's where
Yeah.
always where the valuable details are. Right?
Yeah.
Like I look at a property thinking about it, I'm like, oh, what like could the rent be? What are the current tenants paying? It's never in the data. It's always in this like long form text box. Um, or it'll give you some like instances of, oh, like the property says it's 4 bedrooms. Is it 2 units? Is it 1 unit? Is it,
Mm.
oh, it's in here, right? So I mean, it's about doing it at scale. If you're looking at an individual property, you can read it and come to the same conclusions. But I think
Even
like
emails,
so many like that.
most of my emails, I let AI go through it once, and it's great. It's quick, send it off, and it's
Totally.
makes
Yeah, yeah. Writing things at scale for sure,
yeah,
and at decent quality as well. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
there's a million use cases for how this can be implemented in real estate and outside.
So you focus primarily on multiplex. Is that what you're saying?
2 to 3 units. I've gotten into converting them from, a single family home to a duplex or a triplex.
Cool.
That's kind of, yeah, where the sweet
Okay.
spot is.
So you've done a triplex.
Yep.
Oh,
Done a couple.
awesome. Can you tell me more about that? Because a lot of people have done duplexes. Triplexes are, once again, are somewhat rare
Yeah.
currently.
Yeah. I think finding a place that is like physically fit for it, A, just like straight up has the square footage, and
Mhm.
B, and this one is difficult, but when you walk through a property, honestly, the first one that I converted from a single family home to a triplex, I thought it was going to be a duplex until I physically went to the property. And then myself, my real estate agent, and my inspector, as I was talking about earlier, kind of collectively came to the conclusion that it was like had a side entrance, had a back entrance. You could pretty easily add a staircase kind of to go up and to go down. Everyone could have their own entrance. The height in the basement was like super suitable for like
Hmm.
a beautiful basement unit. We had to add a window here and there. Like there are obviously some work that you have to do, but it's I think
But the,
walking in there and
but the
visualizing what the
elements,
drawings could look like.
so I like the element of the side door and two side entrances. So I'm assuming
Yeah.
that the 2 units in the basement and 1 unit
No, so there
upstairs.
was a side door that already had basement steps.
Okay.
Then there was a back door that was very, very close to the sort of main floor's stairs that went up to the second floor.
No.
Right. So we essentially just added a wall around it so that it was its own area. But I mean, this place, like many single family homes that are like that, just don't have the square footage to have their own units. So this place like
So
had
when
that
when
square
was this
footage.
house built, and what's the square footage of it?
I think this house was like 60s or 70s,
Really?
like not too old.
Okay.
Every unit now, and they're almost the same square footage, is probably between 750 and 850 square feet,
Okay. Nice.
basement included. And the only the real like expensive sort of X factor on this place was the second floor. was actually 1.5 stories. It was not 2 stories. So we had one of these, and we cut off a massive dormer on the front of the house
Awesome,
to
awesome.
basically create that square footage.
Must be a beautiful view.
Pardon me?
Must be a beautiful view.
It is. It is. It is now. That was a lot more work than I cut out. But that was kind of the math before, right? To what we were speaking about earlier. It was, the inflows and the outflows of the property kind of make sense if it's 2 units.
Hmm.
Like we're close. It's not great. Maybe it'd be negative a few months. But with 3 units, it was totally worth that additional, I want to say 40 to 50,000 that we spent on like this dormer and everything that came with it.
Easily. Oh
Um,
yeah, yeah, easily. Sure.
right, right. So and that was again thinking like, what will this property be worth in 7 to 10 years? And not
Mhm.
necessarily, will it have the ability to carry itself was the only short-term question.
Can you provide some
Um,
numbers? Do you feel comfortable with numbers?
yeah, I think we bought that one for something like 480.
Nice.
This was in Welland in kind of the Niagara
Yep.
area. Um, I can't remember exactly what we put into this one, but it was definitely north of 200.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of work. The basement was essentially a blank canvas, so we built an entire unit in it.
Nice.
The main floor just needed a few walls. It was mostly done, like the finishings were mostly done. I think this one we replaced the boiler system. It wasn't the super old one that I referenced earlier, but I think that one needed to be replaced as well. And yeah, the upstairs, the second floor was really where all of the big work went into. I'm trying to remember the total cost on that one. This one was a few years ago, but yeah, it's operating well today, knock on wood.
And who's the tenant profile in that area?
Um, I actually think we have a couple now on each floor. So because of the size that I mentioned, they're all 2 bedrooms,
Nice.
which kind of changes the profile, right? If it were a bachelor unit, we may have like a single guy or a single girl in those
Hmm.
units, but they're all mostly blue collar couple. One of them has a young kid, but yeah,
And
Welland's a really
they
nice place
share
on
they
that
share the
front.
backyard. They're okay with all this, no issues.
They share the backyard. We took the garage, which was kind of set back on the property, and we actually cut up the inside into 3 separate parts, so that way they could all have like unique independent storage.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the
Those are kind
future.
of
This is the future of Ontario. You take a lot, just split it into 3 or 4 units right
yeah.
there.
It honestly it had a big backyard space, and I've always thought about like you cut this up. I'm a little bit more concerned about if you're in a bedroom community, do you have parking for everyone? Like everyone's
Yeah,
going to have a
yeah,
car.
yeah.
Do you have that's more my concern. A little bit about storage, but look, the more space, the more options. And then the question is, can you get creative with those options?
In Kingston, the third unit, fourth unit doesn't even need parking space.
Yeah,
That's how desperate they are. There's
especially if you're
no,
not far off Princess, right?
well, not even that. Anywhere in Kingston, the third unit, fourth unit does not need a parking spot, which
Yeah.
seems ludicrous because I mean Kingston's still very much a small
So
community.
it's funny, like as I was looking through the original like bylaws when I was doing that work in Welland on that property, and coming to the conclusion
Yeah.
that like I mean that community has for a long time been pretty pro development. They just like we're short on housing, and so the rules are very different. Um, Whereas like its next door neighbor, St. Catharines, is a little bit more restrictive, historically speaking. But as this was all happening, I was like taking a walk down Dufferin Street in Toronto, and there was a development going up. And I happened to recognize the name of the developer, and I knew someone there, and I was messaging with them. And so it was eightplex, no parking. And I was
That's
like,
Toronto. That's Toronto.
Toronto,
and
that's Toronto.
and it's
I was like, I
probably
can't
by a
believe
subway station or a
not
walk, what,
far.
15-minute walk from the subway station. Yeah.
Totally,
Yeah, that's
totally.
yeah. And you can park on the
Just like
street as well.
different
You can park on the
worlds, right?
street.
Yeah,
Yeah,
park on
you
the
can park on the
street.
street.
Yeah,
Other places, small towns are like, come November, December, you can't park in the street. So,
yeah.
Michael, it's easy talking with you. It really is. You're very knowledgeable on all this, and I like how systematic and meticulous you are on your approach. Once again, I like that. Where do you see this spanning out? Like, what's your long-term vision with this in like 5, 10 years? Are you just gonna scale it to a certain level and then just cash out, start lending out funds, or just ride it out until early retirement of some sort? What's the end goal?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think like I never really had these aggressive, I want to retire on the cash flow of the property and how do I minimize the time frame to do that type of
You
goals.
seem like you like your job. You're good at it.
Yeah, yeah.
You yeah.
I like my job. I like, the general career line that I'm on. Like there's nothing that's going to make me want to necessarily jump away from it soon. The
You're not looking
question
to
I
move
think
to
is
Mexico or anytime soon.
no, no, no. The question I think is more along the lines of, that I try and think a lot about, 10 years, 15 years from now, is the capital better served doing something that's a little bit more directly passive? So if it
Mm,
is lending, like on what level or scale would I be comfortable lending? What I do want to use the constraint in this whole portfolio of holding things for 7 to 10 years.
yep.
Because especially, people who were investing 2, 3 years ago who had held a property for 2 or 3 years know what it's like to be on the upside of that run up, right? And you feel like, oh, I was so smart for this, but like in actual fact,
As
you
if they
you
have
just got
nothing
lucky.
control. Exactly. We did a home run like in
Totally.
2019. It was a
Yeah, yeah.
great year. I had no idea. I was offering it to JV partners. I'm like, I was being conservative, but it flew off the park. I had no
Right.
idea. And everybody got their money back, but it wasn't
So that
anything that we had done.
yeah, that's my point. And in the last couple of years, I've seen instances where like partnerships were executed just as well as they were prior to,
Yeah.
but because the market went upside down, the partnership also went upside down.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people don't often like to draw draw those two things together, but that's one of the reasons why. And I have a few partners at this point, and I'm usually pretty clear with them about like I am not looking to exit before a cycle is done. um if you have hesitations about that, we probably shouldn't partner. Like we're
Hmm.
probably not a good fit, amongst other things.
So,
But
so is it 5 years or 7 years? You say a cycle is 7 to 10 years.
7 to 10 is
That's what you
historically,
tell
yeah,
them. Yeah.
this, yeah,
You
yeah,
you you know about the 18-year cycle as well?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
That's cool.
This, you know what, like there's so many mini cycles within these.
Yeah.
I just like 7 to 10 hedges you against like a really serious, um, 3 or 4 year downturn that has nothing to come back to you. And maybe that changes. And the secret rub of the 7 to 10 year piece is that's a significant enough amount of time too to pay down a decent chunk of the mortgage, right?
Hmm.
If you're on a 30 year, that's could be almost a
Hmm.
third of it. And so now you've got refinance options on your side as well, even if rates don't go up, or sorry, don't go down, right?
So
Like,
what's the return on equity that you look for in order to keep that investment and not allocate the funds elsewhere? You have a number
uh,
in mind?
pardon me,
The
sorry, can you
return
repeat
on
that?
equity.
Yeah.
Because as you're mentioning, I mean, there's a bit of equity built up in there. They're getting cash flow, but at what point there's like a balancing act. At what point you go, you know what, those funds are better used elsewhere because the return on equity is somewhat low. Is there a number there?
Yeah.
Is it 2%, 5%, 10%? What's
So
what's
it's
your
interesting.
number?
I've been trying to balance that with return on time, because like that just in short, like the value of your time changes, especially as you progress in a,
Very
in a
important.
career. And as you like take on like dependents and family members and things like
Ah,
this, right? Like the
huge,
value of your
huge
time
part.
changes
Time is really the
incredibly.
asset.
Totally. And I mean, that value doesn't change based on where you're putting your money. It changes based on where you're putting your time. Whereas
Hmm.
if you're just comparing, like, for example, two different jobs, you can very directly be like, here's the hourly rate here, here's the hourly rate here. They both take the same number of hours to do. Like, easy,
Yeah.
easy answer, right? So I'll say that's like one aspect of how I try and figure out what the long-term thing here is. Um, the other thing is like there are non-asset things that you may want to allocate some capital to as well. So how do those play into it? You want a vacation property? Are these always going to be
Oh,
rentals?
yes,
Um,
yes.
there's just like life things that need to be paid for. What are you sort of willing to do on that front, or what is going to make you happiest on that front? And not just
It's an
you,
important element.
family
It's a
as
very
well.
important
Right,
element, the happiness part of it, because it's not always but the numbers. Like I agree.
right. So return on
Lifestyle.
capital is like an aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
It's totally an aspect of it.
Is a
Uh,
return on happiness, is there a calculation? Is there, I'm not looking for a percentage there.
what's
Looking
the
for a number.
utility? Yeah, we're
Give me the
really talking
equation.
about economics now. Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And I think like I'm trying to think about it less in terms of what is the total, amount of net worth that you're trying to grow, because that
Mhm.
is like an early indicator of how quickly you're growing wealth. Um, but like, how are you going to use that? Is it going to be useful for you? Is there a usefulness cap where like if you go beyond that, you just have a number behind you that you can refer to? Um, I think long term it's more about like how much cash flow you're able to spool out of, the back end. Like I think the example I like to give to people is if you could have any job and that you wanted and they all paid the same amount, like which one would you pick? And
Mhm.
now you're picking based on how much you would enjoy your time there and less
Mhm.
what it would spool back to you to use in your life. Right. And so where do I enjoy spending my time? Is like question number one, I think. In again, long term, short term, you make many, I think, sacrifices on that front. Um, and then the other piece is like, is is that setup going to give you the cash flow that you need to create that life? And if it's not, you probably still have more work to do on the wealth building front. And if it is, you should probably not be actively continuing to build the wealth because it's not giving you that return on time anymore,
Mhm.
right? Like there actually is a cap, I would say, for most people. For myself, there definitely is.
Yeah. There definitely is. I meet more and more. I meet, especially people in their 50s.
Mhm.
They're just selling out, and then they're just lending out the funds or putting in good ETFs and getting fixed returns or some sort.
Lending is
Yeah,
probably the best example, like private lending, I should
yeah,
say, of that rate being and look, it comes with its own risks. So this is
of
certainly not
course.
me being like, oh, everyone should privately lend their money. Um, but like, let's say you're able to get a 9 to 12% return, something along those lines. It's just less time to manage those. It doesn't mean that if it does go south, you don't have a whole bunch of stuff to deal with. But I mean, if you can compare that to a property where you have 9 to 12% returns, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
would hope that it's better than that, but if you do, you're managing a ton,
Sure. The
right?
management and if you look at the rules or the landlord tenant board, it's all the tenant's favors. Well, if you're the bank, it's
Yeah,
unbelievable. The rules are your favor. It's like night and day, completely
totally,
different. So, but
totally.
everyone has their own approach. I just find that as you're on your journey of investing, as you mentioned, your allocation of funds are used differently. And I find those who do well are those who aren't attached to a certain property. I just recently sold a property I've had for 15
Yeah,
years. And I'm
yeah.
like, gone, done. I allocated the funds elsewhere. I'm happy with that.
It's so hard to like think with a brick wall in front of you and say like this is an
Yeah.
asset, that's all that it is, right? Especially if it's a property that you move into at some point, or like even for a
What
little
I
bit in
like
your
to be
life.
remembered. I like to be remember that in 50 years or less, someone else, some stranger is going to be living in my house. So what's the point of getting attached
Yeah,
to it? Like unless it
yeah,
like easily 10 years, potentially 10 years, some other
yeah,
family is going to be enjoying this house and it's going to be all wrapped up emotionally with it. So it's just a piece
yeah.
of asset. It's just brick and mortar. Sure, you got some income out of it, but if it's not aligned with your values and where you want to go, then dump it, move on.
Yeah. I try to think of it to keep that line of,
It's not
thinking
always
going.
easy.
I try and think of it as all of the assets are always all for sale,
Yeah.
right? The question is to answer the question you had earlier, which is where else can this capital go to be better served? Um, and the reality is, sure, there's a market price, and I like to consider myself pretty like there's a market value for each of these. But I mean, the market dictates it. And in the real estate world, you may have one asset that is an anomaly amongst so many things that we consider comparable. And it's because one buyer has so much more value on that thing. They've
Mm.
always wanted to live in this area, and this area is pretty small.
Their
And it's
grandmother
because
lives around the corner. Yeah,
exactly,
exactly. I get it.
exactly, right? And so for them, it actually is worth more. They didn't overbuy. There's more value for them than there is for everyone else there.
Yeah.
Um, and it might be tangible things, maybe intangible things, but why would I ever be like, I'm just strictly not selling this if someone else can, like you said, enjoy it more,
Yes, for
right?
sure. Michael,
Um,
we could talk for hours, it seems. I love talking with you. It's really easy. Well, here's one more last question. no regrets. I'm sure you have no regrets on your journey from 2016 on. No regrets.
None,
Because
zero,
what's the
yeah, for
point?
sure.
It's just waste of energy. But what would you do differently? Would you have
Yeah,
changed a few things along the way? What would?
yeah. It's a good question. I think there's two things that come to mind. One thing was a lesson that it just took me too long to learn, and the other one, actually, I put them both in the same category. So I told you I cycled through a few property managers, and if I can give just like a quick anecdote on one of them happened because I thought that they were not competent
We got
enough. It was
time.
like
My
pretty straight.
producer does give me a limit. Just there's no
All
limit
right,
on
cool.
this.
Cool. Appreciate it. Yeah, one of them was there was like a pretty obvious red flag. They were recommending tenants that they probably shouldn't have, and I stepped away. The other one um fired me. The second one.
What? Hold
And
on. The property manager fired you.
totally.
How?
I got like a pretty cold email one day being like, "Hey, I don't think we should work together anymore." But the reason was completely legitimate. I
Yeah.
didn't understand it very well at the time. But as like it sunk in, look, I had spent years, quite literally, managing my own properties, learning from others who had managed their own properties, up to and including my mom, who I told you was a career property manager.
Mm,
And one of the things that comes with that is you're very attached to the process and you're very attached to information about the process, and like every detail is important to you. And in short, I
yes.
was probably over asking for
Yes.
information.
Yes.
Now, we never came to an agreement early on what level of autonomy each of us would have, which was my
Mm,
big learning, was like, what is our method of communication? What thing can happen where it's your decision versus my decision? And how much should I be involved here? And I was definitely over here, and they were definitely over here, and there wasn't much overlap. Had we had that discussion early on, I actually think I might be working with them today because I
yeah.
think that they're a credible and good quality property management company, likely. But we didn't. And I had that conversation later with
And
other
what
property
span? Like
managers.
when did it take? When did it occur? You signed the contract and after 6 months or so, how long did it take?
Yeah, probably a few months, maybe 6 months.
Okay.
I can't remember whether we had secured a tenant or not together. But luckily, I had made the decision to like kind of drip feed them the portfolio. Like you take one property, let's see how it goes, then we'll do two properties and so on.
Mhm.
And that was on the first one. That part I remember. Um, And so, yeah, I mean, look, it was a perfectly reasonable business decision for their leader to make. I was probably, especially with one property, right? Like I was taking so much of their time, and I learned a ton from it. So that I would definitely change to answer your question is, and now I approach not just that very important, vendor relationship, let's call it, but every relationship that I have as part of the business is what is each of our level of autonomies? What is each of our individual responsibilities? And what is the communication that bridges those two things? How's it going to actually play out?
Mm, that's
Um,
good. So what were you were just asking for too much data or too much knowledge on day-to-day operation. And
Basically,
sometimes
yeah,
they didn't know it or they knew it, but it was just more of a hassle to feed into this
yeah. I
mind
was
of
asking for
yours.
information because when I did it myself, I needed that information to make decisions.
Hmm.
Um, but in this particular instance, I wasn't going to be the one making those decisions, so I didn't necessarily need to have that information or
Can you
that
give
level
us an
of detail
example?
about the information. Sure, if we were vetting a candidate that could potentially become a tenant,
Hmm.
um, you know, what are all of the different pieces of their background, even before we come to the conclusion that this is probably not going to be someone that we go with? Like, who's making the phone calls to their references? Is it me? Is it you?
Mm,
Um, how much do we need to see their credit report?
yeah.
Do we need to just see the score? Who's calling their work to find out if their employment letter is legit? Like all of these things, right? There's
Hmm.
just so many levels of detail. And now, like, I'm in most cases involved at the very last step. Like, we're recommending this person strongly. Here's their entire profile summarized. Please sign the lease. And in most cases, I just read it and be like, yeah, I agree. Let's do it. And that's the opposite end of the extreme. That's after
Hmm.
you've built a whole bunch of trust and you've come to an agreement on how much information sharing is going to happen. Um, but I should say like that probably wasn't going to happen for a while in that instance. But Yeah, I was just asking for too much information. Like I was not being an owner non-operator. I was being an owner operator and hiring someone to operate.
That's good. That's good. It's like a transition. It's like it's part of the journey. You got to learn a few things, especially if you like the control and you've been in control of the whole time. Letting
Yeah.
that go is
So that was a
it's
skill that
level.
I had and I was doing, and so there was a risk that I was going to continue to do it and want to do it at my level of
Yes.
intricacy.
Yes.
And if you're approaching or hiring for a skill that you don't have, you have the risk of going to the other extreme, which is not necessarily checking and just assuming, well, this person is not only an expert but has my best interest in mind, and they're going to do everything right. And in that particular instance, and I've
Sounds
made this mistake
dangerous.
as well, yeah, you miss some things, or you just go with their assumptions without validating. I joke with an agent that I work with pretty often, that whatever rents, if we're talking about a property, I'm like, well, what do you think a two-bedroom could rent for? What do you think a one-bedroom could rent for? And I always say to him, like, whatever you tell me, I'm going to take like $300 off of it, right? Because like, jokes aside, we have different incentives, and you're generally wanting to be a little bit less, or more conservative, depending how you look at it, right?
Of
More
course.
liberal in your approach. Um, so anyways, yeah, obviously taken to the extreme, they want to transact. You're going to be owning for a long time. You have different fundamental
Of
incentives
course.
there, and you know, you could be working with the best human in the world, and it's not about their malice. It's about what they spend time thinking about. They're
Their
going to share with
biases.
you totally.
Completely. Yeah,
Um,
completely. We're all somewhat biased on our perspective, and
right,
we think we're right for the most part. We think we're right, and we don't question on how well are we on the rightness or probability of being wrong with our belief system. It goes
right.
into a rabbit hole, but it can be messy. But I definitely agree with what you're saying. Here's my last question, Michael. What's the one thing you do that enables you to grow even further in your
Mm,
portfolio, business wise, personal wise, relationship wise? What is it you do on a regular basis that allows you to grow to the next level? Because it seems as if you've been growing very well, and there's a lot room for growth as well coming.
yeah. So I mentioned curiosity earlier. There's a
Yeah.
quote that comes to mind that I'm going to try and nail here if I can. But it's something along the lines of, if you're not willing to learn, no one can help you. But if you're determined to learn, no one can stop you.
Oh, I
Um,
love that.
and I try and keep that front of mind, because the reality is, no matter what your relationship is with someone, you can learn something from everyone you meet, right?
Yes.
And finding out what that thing is, to me, is always what I try and keep top of mind. Like, what is the thing that I can take away from this person that I truly like didn't know before, that'll help me move forward? And and conversely, what is the thing that they can take away from me, and how can I be helpful? But
Love it.
ultimately, I think it's about learning and then using the learnings, and not just knowing them, right?
That's a whole new subject altogether. We can talk for hours about that.
Yeah,
Utilizing the knowledge. If not, it's just wasted knowledge. What's the point? What's the
right. The
point
book
of
is still
learning?
the book is still on the shelf, right? Still up there. It
All
looks
right.
good up there.
So Michael, where can people find you, and where can they reach out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I have an Instagram account that is mostly about my real estate portfolio. That's certain capital, just like the words certain and the word capital.
Nice.
So at is the handle. Got a website as well, which links to my email address. It's just certaincapital.ca. Um, but yeah, that's probably the best
Sounds
spot.
good. Sounds
My
good. We'll definitely.
DMs, yeah,
Well, we'll get those linked on below, and we'll post this up. I think this has been a great conversation. Always a pleasure talking with you, Michael. This is quite a pleasure speaking with you for an hour, and I hope to speak with you again.
totally. I appreciate the time, Renee. Thanks a lot,
You're very
and
welcome.
we'll talk soon.
Yes. Bye bye.
All right, take care.